Hello, welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us today as we continue our chronological read through of the Bible. Today we're going to read three Psalms that ponder the problem of suffering of God's people, the suffering of God's people in the face of the seeming exaltation of the wicked. I mean, why do God's people suffer when, well, in our modern terms, when drug dealers and dictators accumulate great wealth? I mean, is God not fair? How can he allow such injustices? Psalm 73 lays the problem out quite clearly. The writer of this psalm is a temple musician at the time of King David named Asaph. He notes that he envied the prosperity of the wicked. They seemed to have no problems and great wealth. I mean, they were proud and they were arrogant and they seemed to be able to get away with it just fine. So he began to feel that it was a waste of time for him to follow God's ways. Probably familiar with that particular thought process somewhere along the line in your life, I'm sure. But then he looked forward and he remembered that he didn't follow God's ways for personal gain, but for salvation. For the wicked will ultimately reap the fruits of what they have sown. God will preserve the righteous, but the wicked, they will perish. So Asaph ends by declaring that it's good to be with God, to have him as your refuge, and to tell of his deeds. Psalm 77 is our second psalm for today. In Psalm 77, catastrophe has befallen Israel and Judah. And the psalmist, well, he's rattled to the core. Sure, it makes sense that God would chasten and correct his people. But this is just too much. Has God abandoned them? Has his compassion for them run out? But then the psalmist remembers the past. Remember in the previous psalm, he thought of the future. Now he remembers the past, how God dealt with the Egyptians, how God dealt with the Canaanites. Then he remembered how God leads his people like a shepherd, a good shepherd, and he places his trust in God. Psalm 78 takes a different approach. It acknowledges Israel's persistent disobedience and idolatry and the disaster that it's brought on her. And it desires to make sure that Israel doesn't do something like this again. So in other words, this psalm acknowledges the past, but it does it with the intent of making sure that they don't do so again. So the psalmist opens up by adjuring the people to hear, lest they repeat, to discern, lest they stumble again, to obey, lest they fall like their forefathers. He reminds the reader of Israel's rebellion, singling out the tribe of Ephraim for whatever reason. There's really no clear reason why he does that, possibly just poetic liberty. Mentions how their weapons, the bows, were of no use when they refused to live by God's law. God was good to them in the wilderness, yet they rebelled against him there. God judged them for rebellion, and then he showed them mercy as he fed them manna and quail. And so the cycle continued as the people rebelled and God showed mercy, and the people rebelled and God showed mercy. God displayed his power in Egypt and at the Red Sea and again in Canaan. The people rebelled throughout the time of the judges until finally God allowed the ark to be captured. And then God gave them a good shepherd again, a good shepherd like Moses and King David. As God has done over and over and over and over again in the past, so God will do in the future. They will be redeemed from Babylon, for God's grace never fails. Well, again, may God be with you and bless you. I pray that our time together is edifying for you and that your reading of God's scripture has given you new knowledge, new understanding, and strengthened your faith. May God be with you and bless you. I look forward to joining with you again tomorrow.